Hi again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and given what I do for a living, I get a lot of chance to interact with people on the topic of plants. Some of those people are homesteaders, people who really care about the idea of being sustainable and self-sufficient within the land. And I hear two different things that they say, which at first sound the same, but are very different when you look at them carefully. The first one I hear is that I will only eat what I grow, or sometimes they include in that I will also eat what I harvest or catch, and that's all fine too, but it describes their ethic, the way that they want to become self-sufficient and just live off of the land. The second one is a slightly different statement, even though it sounds similar, and they say I will only plant things that I can eat, which moves from being a statement of why you're doing or what you're doing over to how you're doing it. And I think actually that it's somewhat incomplete and flawed. You're basically arbitrarily sorting plants into these two categories, edible or ornamental, useful or not in a certain way, which I think is actually a false dichotomy and very misleading. Today I'm going to recommend you a bunch of plants that are I'm going to put into the category of useful, even if they aren't going to end up in your zucchini loaf. So I'm going to take you through those today, and I think I can sort them into about 6 different categories of uses and take you through some of the recommendations. Special use number 1 is just to expand your definition of edibility, because many people put all of the veggies and fruits into this one box of well-known edible plants, and then the ornamental landscape, shrubs and plants as a completely separate group. But when you go to the landscape like I did this morning and you pull out a couple of shoots, this one here is from elderberry and this one is from sweet Sicily, and they each have their own edible uses, even if they're not going to be used in a salad. Like for instance, this one here obviously has berries and they're not very palatable, but you can process them into quite a nice syrup. Also, the flowers of the elder, and I'll put in a picture here as well, are traditionally used for flavoring May wine. This sweet Sicily is a beautiful flowering plant with this ferny foliage from the carrot family. It's great for beneficial insects, but it also is used to help add the impression of sweetness into your dishes. Let's talk about edible flowers. Nasturtium adds a peppery flavoring to a salad. Forage, which I like quite a lot, has these beautiful blue flowers that taste like cucumber. To garnish a salad, put them in a drink. They're fantastic that way. This one here is a Agastaki, which is a little tiny perennial in my pot right now. It's unwisely already talking about flowering, but I just recently heard that the Agastaki, being a part of the mint family, its leaves can be used as kind of a substitute for tarragon. So when you go to the ornamental landscape, there's just tons like this. Pot marigold is another one where the flowers are edible and they can be used as a substitute for saffron, for instance, for coloring up a rice dish. And what you'll find is that when you look closely at the traditional uses of common landscape shrubs and flowers, that many of them have traditional edible uses as well. Use number 2, do any of you guys keep bees? Because the same way that you would provide forage and fodder crops for your livestock, well, for bees, the flowers are the forage. I'm going to give you some recommendations here of just plants that are super easy to have in the landscape, will often self-seed. Things like cosmos that are fantastic for both nectar and pollen. Clover, which you want to have around just to improve your soil because it fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere. So fantastic choice there. That borage that I mentioned in the last section, once again, super popular with the bees. Goldenrod, another one. Joe Pye weed, I'll put up a picture of that as well. Fantastic for attracting bees, and all of these things will tend to either self-seed themselves or take care of themselves in the landscape. So you put them in once, you probably have them forever. I did a video last year with Josh from Plan B Native Plant Nursery where he focuses on plants for pollinators. I'll link that one up above here, and he really more focused on the native plants, and I've given you some ornamentals that are common in the trade. I don't think either one is a mutually exclusive approach, and it does bear saying at the end of this section here that even if you don't keep bees, having good pollen set or pollination between your different plants often is important to your yield with fruit trees and so on. So keeping a healthy population of bees in the local area is not a bad idea. Use number 3, do you get any pests in your garden? Because frankly, a well-fertilized fruit patch or veggie patch is an absolute magnet for bad pests like aphids or spider mites that will build up in giant populations if you don't control them in some way. And frankly, many people within the community are quite reluctant, understandably, to bring harsh chemicals into their garden. So the better way, the more balanced way, is to plant your garden with a wide diversity of plants that help to attract and to support beneficial insects that will be the predators and get rid of those aphids over time. So I can give you some examples here, and I've done so in the past. I'll link a video I've done on a full topic of plants that I recommend to help bring in beneficial insects. But let's talk about some right now. Yarrow has little tiny flowers that do a particularly good job of supporting parasitoids that attack aphids. We also have Angelica on this list, is fantastic. I'll put up a picture of Iberis, which is both attractive and comes early in the season, so you'll get some support early on when you have that first outbreak. Or something like this, milkweed, which I have emerging here, which is again just a very pretty and trouble-free landscape plant that helps to bring in the beneficial insects. Use number 4 that I'm going to talk about is how about some income from cut flowers or selling potted plants. And along your journey towards self-sufficiency, it is kind of an uncomfortable truth that you really have to have the resources to become self-sufficient. So economic self-sufficiency is part of it, and selling cut flowers can be a part of that. I look towards Ian and Serena from You Can't Eat the Grass channel as models of this, or kind of an interesting case study of this, where they started out growing and selling their own veggies. And again, the name You Can't Eat the Grass, I'm not going to say it's ironic at this point, but you also can't eat the flowers that they're selling, but you can eat the money that you make off of those flowers. And they've made that move for reasons that make a lot of sense to them, and I respect their choices 100%. But it is something about opening your mind to the idea that doing cut flowers can absolutely, or like I do, I grow and sell potted plants that I grow from seed or from cuttings. Many of them are ornamental, some of them are edible. They can blend together because there are lots of good reasons to put these plants into your garden. Use number 5, fragrance, dye, and medicinal uses. And I am going to insert some footage here of some bloodroot I had over in the other garden. The bloodroot is used for making a red dye. And these creepy looking things here, this is podophyllum or mayapple, and they are kind of neat looking. I love them in the garden, and they're also used for making a brown or black dye. The traditional use of this sweet woodruff was to pluck it and stuff pillows with it. It's called bed straw, is another one of its common names. Kind of gives the scent of fresh mowed hay. But also things like roses and lavender are fantastic for harvesting for fragrance. When it comes to the issue of medicinal use of plants, I'm going to beg off a little bit just based on my own lack of knowledge or expertise in the area. I do know that when I've cut monkshood and got the sap on my hand, I've had my heart palpitate in ways I wouldn't really like. But the point of this is that plants can have very powerful effects on the human body, and if you're going to go into the issue of using things medicinally, you should do so with a qualified opinion behind you on this, and maybe even with the advice of your doctor. But I wouldn't discount their usefulness within the landscape of having medicinal plants. Use number 6, I'm going to put these into the category of shade, shelter, soil protection, and weed suppression. And these are just physical things that you can accomplish with larger plants that will help all of the plants around them. Having a wide open location with lots of sun is fantastic, but there's such a thing as too much sun. High dappled shade, especially in the afternoon, can really help to bring some crops into their own. Similarly, if you have some shelter from the wind, we have some wind today, I hope you're not hearing it, but a little bit of shelter from the wind, I mean, that's the long-term plan on this farm here, is to get more verticality on the edges of the property and the rooms of the property to try to bring down this wind and help the other plants to grow well. Similarly, when you talk about soil protection or erosion protection, there are plants that can help you to reduce the erosion. In this case, I'm going to talk about a couple of roses, rugosa roses, and I have some Scots roses that do a fantastic job of just sending down suckers and holding a bank in place, and then you get the flowers, of course. For shade trees, it'll vary a little bit depending on your climate, but what I like here is willows. I have a nice curled willow in the front yard and a big weeping willow in the front yard as well, which provides some beautiful high shade for me. And in terms of shelter, or the borders of the property, I'm putting up something called carpinus, which I'll show you a shot here as well. It's just a really nicely manageable, sturdy tree that I'm training along the west fence of the property to just create a nice boundary and barrier and to cut down on the wind. As for weed suppression, well, it does go without saying that if you leave open soil, you're going to end up with loads and loads of weeds, and you'll have to fight those. So anything you can do to plant some cover or to cover that soil with other plants, they may not directly be edible, but once again, with something like clover, you can actually be adding nitrogen to the soil, and those leguminous cover crops over the winter can be fantastic for adding fertility into your soil. Well, that is it for my 6 special uses for ornamental plants for homesteaders, but I'd want to close with one other thought here, which is to ask the question, would it really be so bad to consider ornamental use as a use valid all on its own? I mean, do you enjoy good music? Does that make your life better? When you go into a house, do you like it to be clean and well organized and well decorated? Does that make you feel more at home and more at ease? Would it be the wrong thing to consider that in a landscape as well, to have some things that are there just to make it look better, look nice, make you enjoy the landscape as well, especially when you stack those layers of usage, when you have the borage that can be 3 things all at once, helping the bees. You can harvest it for the flowers, but it also looks pretty and then takes care of itself in the landscape by self-seeding. So this is what I want to encourage here, is just thinking broader than just, okay, is it on the list of approved veggies? Or maybe we can take a wider view as to what's a useful plant in the landscape as far as homesteading or self-sufficiency is concerned. All right, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions about these, please drop them down below in the comments of the video. I'll see what I can do to help.